Today's staff is staff pay, and we're up to line 4. The Mishnah brings a number of different scenarios in which a woman received a get shelo Gittin, the get was pasul, and she got married. And one of the dinim that are absolute requirements in a get kosher is the name of the Baal and the name of the Isha. Shina shmo ushma, if in the writing of the get, the sof made a mistake about the name of the Baal, or alternatively, the name of the Isha, or the name of the city of the Baal, the name of the city of the Isha, all these cases lead us to a get pasul. And if she gets married based on this get, teitze mizeh mizeh, she has to receive a get from her first husband and her second. All the knossos, the penalties that we listed in the past, apply to her. And she basically forfeits her ksuba. And if she has children illegally, they'll be mamzerim. Now, in the case of a Yavama who falls for Yibum to her late husband's brother, if she is an erva, and the Mishnah at the beginning of Yavamos lists 15 categories of arayas, then there's no Yibum and there's no Chalitza. And this also impacts on Hatzara, which means that if, let's say, Reuven was married to both Rachel and Leah, and he dies without children, and Rachel and Leah fall for Yibum, if Rachel is an erva to Reuven's brother Shimon, then even Leah, her tzara, is ptura min hayibum umin hachalitza. She doesn't fall at all. There's no zikas yibum. However, what happens in the following scenario? Let's say Reuven was married to both Rachel and Leah, or so he thought. Rachel is an erva to Reuven's brother Shimon, but unbeknown to Reuven, Rachel is an islandess, and it's only years down the line that they discover that she's an islandess, which means that the kiddushin of Reuven to Rachel were kiddushay tovs, and in effect, what that means is that Leah, the tzara, was actually chayeves b'yibum b'chalitza. And we go on now, and it says, Kol arayos sha'amru tzarasei mutaros, holchu atzarasei elu v'nisu. When Reuven died, Leah, the tzara of Rachel, went ahead and got married, thinking that she's a tzara of an erva because Rachel's an erva onto Shimon the Yavam. Nimtzu elu islandess. But as it turns out, Rachel, the erva to Shimon, was an islandess, which means that, in effect, Reuven, the late Reuven, was never married to Rachel, and therefore Leah falls for Yibum, but in the meantime, she got married. And the chiddush is, even though Leah, when she got married, had every right to assume that there was no zikas Yibum, and that is because what would cross her mind about her tzara Rachel to think that Rachel is an islandess, and therefore the kedushin to Rachel is kedushay tos. Nevertheless, she falls under this category of kol hadrachim ha'elu ba. Next, Hakoni says Yevimto. Now, Shimon, the Yavam, after the death of his brother Reuven, went ahead and he married one of the two wives of his late brother Reuven. V'holcha tzarasa, the other wife, whom he did not marry, went and niseis liacher. She went ahead and got married to another man, nimtzei zu, and yet, as it turns out, the one that Shimon was miyavim turned out to be Hoisa Islandess. And therefore the Kiddushin to his late brother were Kiddushay Tos. Is Teitzi Mizeh Umizeh V'Kol HaDrachim HaElu Ba. Now, this din seems to be identical to the previous din. And the Gemara later on is going to explain that although in both cases we're dealing with a Yavama who actually has a Zikas Yimum and went ahead and got married to an Ish Zar, but we need both cases, as we'll soon see later on. Kosav Sofer Get Lish, a Sofer wrote for the Baal a get. He hasn't yet given over the get to the Baal. The Isha commissioned the same Sofer to write a Shovar, which means that with the get and the Gerushin, she will now collect Haksuba. And this shtar is a shtar piron. It's basically a receipt that's going to be given to the Baal after he pays up the ksuba. So she'll receive this shovar from the hands of the sofer, and then she'll pass it on when, in due time, when the ksuba is paid up, to the Baal. But there was a big mistake, a big hullabaloo here, confusion. V'nasan get Isha, instead of giving the shover to the Isha, he handed over the get to the Isha, v'ashover le'ish, and he handed over the shover to the Ish. V'nasnu zelazeh, the Baal gave his wife what he thought was a get, and it turned out to be a shovar. Uliachar zman, and after they checked out what the different documents were, hare get yotze yada ish, v'shovar miyada isha. So then later on, when they checked each one, what shtar do they have, then the Baal is holding on to a get, which he never delivered to his wife. She is holding on to a shovar, and she never got a get. And then she went ahead, under the assumption that what document had been delivered to her, it was indeed the get in her mind, not unbeknown to her that it was really a shovar, and she got married to someone else. Once again, Rabbi Lazar disagrees. Omer imli alter yatza. He says the following: is the Baal, the original Baal, believed and trusted to break up the marriage between her, his ex, and the second husband? Well, says Rabbi Lazar, it all depends. Imli alter, if immediately after the get was delivered, the shover was given, yata, and now the Baal is holding on to a shover. The Baal is holding on to the get, and she is holding on to the shover. Is ain't say get. Obviously, he never delivered the get, and he's believed to say so. But however, says Rabbi Lazar, and this is the chiddush of Rabbi Lazar, im liachar zman yotza, if a period of time has passed by, and now the Baal says, hey, I'm holding on to the get. I never delivered this get. Harez a get. The get is going to be kosher. We're going to assume that he did deliver the get, and he's lying through his teeth. Lo kol heminu min harishon la'amitz chusa shel sheni. We don't believe the Baal harishon to undermine and invalidate the marriage of his ex-wife to the new husband. And we're going to be choshesh that she and he, the original Baal, and the Isha are setting up some sort of kinunya, which means Ramos, Beineim, and after the Gerushin, they switched it, and she gave the get back to him, he gave the show back to her. This was all just a ploy. And the purpose of this ploy was to be Mavato the second Nisur. Ad kan Lashon HaMishnah. Now we start the Gemara. The Mishnah, in listing the cases where the Rabbanan Pasal the get, has Malchus Sheina Hogenis. My Malchus Sheina Hogenis, Malchus Haromian. The my Korle Malchus Sheina Hogenis, Mishum de'en lehem lo ksav v'lo loshen. So Malchus Romi apparently copied another Safa, another language from a different nation, and they didn't have their own language. And in such a case, they are on a lower level as far as the status of an Ummah is concerned. Omar Ulam if they matkinu Malchus begittin. Why did the Chacham insist that when you write the date in the get, you should write the date according to the Malchus of that country in which the get is written? Mishum Shalom Malchus. This is going to give kavod to the Malchus, that the Malchus will see that we, the Jewish people, mention them in their get. Chashuvim onu beinehem, that in their shtaros they mention our calculation to our kingdom, and that's going to create Shalom Malchus. The Gemara says, wait a minute. V'chi mishum Shalom Malchus, they made a takana in order to make peace and satisfy the kavod of the nations, is therefore Teitzim Avlad Mamzer. They went as far as to say that he who violates this takana and gave a get without mentioning the Malchus, therefore, if she gets married based on this get, because they made such a gzeira mishum and a takana mishum Shalom Malchus, therefore she has to remove her, bust up her marriage to the second husband, and any child she has a mamzer. And Gemara says in. Why? Because Rabbi Meir Litame. This is a reflection and consistent with Rabbi Meir's Shita. What is Rabbi Meir's view? Omer Hoya Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir formulated a principle in Gittin called anyone who deviates from the Takonis Chachamim that establish how a get kosher is meant to be written, the get is absolutely invalid. And if she gets married based on this get, when the get was not written in accordance with the Takonis Chachamim, that's called Meshana Mimateh Shetom Chacham Avlad Mams. So our Mishnah, which is a Stam Mishnah, reflects the sheet of Rabbi Meir. Now today in our time, we don't write a get anywhere in the world according to the minyan of Malchus, but rather we write according to the minyan of Yetzirah, since creation. And the Mefarshim write that the Amim today, in their own documents, they don't mention the years of the Malchus. The Mishnah says, Shum Malchus Yavan Utzricha. Why did the Mishnah need both Malchus Romi and Malchus Modai V'Yavan? Diashmin, if it would have said Malchus Shein Oget, it's just Rome, I would have said Mishum Dimalicha, because the Malchus Romi still exists. And therefore, if you're giving a get, for example, in Bavel, and you're writing the Shnos Romi, that's going to create a Kpeda. Why are you writing the Malchus of Romi? You're here in Bavel. Avol Malchus Modei Malchus Yomi. These are long gone kingdoms, kingships. They no longer exist. And therefore, the Bavlonians, the secular government of Bavel, will not be mocked, but they're not insulted if you write a name of some ancient society. Might have whatever happened. It's it's the past that's buried deep down below the ground. Malchus Modai Malchus Yom. If you tell me that it's possible, even in the case of a Malchus that doesn't exist anymore, then therefore I should be able to derive Malchus Sheino Genis meaning Rome in a Kal Vachomer, even because Rome is even more of a Kaped because Rome exists. I would have thought Mishum de Malchus also have that Modai and Yavan are still called even today a Malchus. When we describe in the history texts Yavan and Modai, we talk about them as Malchus, even though there's no Malchus before. And the king, therefore, in our local, let's say Bavel, for example, will get a little bit jealous that you're mentioning in your get those Malchios, those great kingships, and you're omitting our Malchus. Avol Binyan Abayis. I would have thought that if you're counting the years of the Binyan Abayis, that doesn't bother any king. I mean, Malchus Yisrael is not called Malchus anymore, and therefore the king would not be makpid in this locality, and the get should be kosher. And therefore the Mishnah had to tell me that even in this case, the melech is makpid and the get is possible. V'yashmein and binyan abayis. And if we had only mentioned the case where they counted the years of binyan abayis, and that's possible, but they didn't mention the case of churban abayis. The Amri Madkere Shvachayu, you're mentioning the Shvach of the Beis Hamikdash, the Tiferes of the Malchus of Yisrael. The king is makbid on that. Perhaps there's an element here of anti-Semitism. I don't know. But I would think Churban Abayis, if he's mentioning how many years is it since the destruction, is the Tzarahu. He's mentioning that Tzar and Shel Yisrael is Eim Olo. He's not going to be makbid on that. Adarabah. Let the Jews mention, their rejection and their destruction. Tzricha, therefore, I need the Mishnah to tell me and be mechadish to me that even if he writes l'churban abayis, the malchus is makbid and the get is therefore possible. The Mishnah says, the sofer messed up. He was located in the east of the city, and he wrote that he was in the west. And once again, the get is possible. Man, who is the person who's in the Mizrach? We mentioned the sofer, but the Gemara doesn't know that yet. Man, ilem lebal, maybe the Baal himself is the subject of his tos, as the Israelis call it, based on Arabic fashla, and he wrote the wrong city of the Baal. So that can't be, because Hainu, we already have that in the Mishnah. In the next part of the Mishnah says Shina Shmo Shma, Shemi Ro, Shemi Ra. So what's the repetition? Ela Lav Sofer. But rather it must be that Chacham made a takana that the Sofer should write the makom where he wrote the get. And that should be included in the text of the get. And when he writes the wrong makom, then the get is possible. Now here, we want to mention a Tosfos and a Rosh. Neither of them appear here in this Masechet, but they're in Masechet Yevamos. And that is, we said over here in our Gemara that Shina Sofer es Mokom Ksivas Haget get Pasul, and the Sofer has to write in the get the place where he wrote the get. However, in addition, he has to write the makom of the Eidim. Where were they at the time that they signed the get? Tosfos in Yevamos and the Rosh in Yevamos are of the opinion that the Sofer doesn't have to write in the get where he wrote the get, the makom ksivas haget. There's no reason or rhyme or reason for such a takana that the sofer should tell us where he wrote the get. That's irrelevant. When it says here sofer, it's lav dafka, but rather it refers to the eidim. The sofer has to write the makom amidas ha'edim. Where were the eidim when they signed the get? And the reason for that is because if, let's say, the get was written and signed in a different city, then the eidim can be subject to Hazama. And therefore, it's very critical that we know where the Eidim were at the time of the Chasima, because if we find out that at the time of the Chasima they were elsewhere, then two Eidim could be Mazim then. So we must write in the get the Makom of the Eidim. In the Amalu Rav, L'Safri Rav, commissioned his sofer. When you're sitting down to write a shtar, b'shile, in a certain place called shile, ksavu b'shile. You should write in the get that you wrote the get in a place called shile. Even though when you got the tzivui of the Baal to write the get, it was in hine. And the flip side, v'chias visu behine. If you're sitting down to write the shtar in hine, so behine, write down the name hine, the mokom of the ksiva, afal gav to nimsun l'chumili b'shili, even though the tzivui that you received to write this shtar is when you were in Shile. And now the Gemara is going to go back to the Ikar Dina Mishnah. If he didn't write in the get l'shem malchus, the get is possible. And now we have a statement here of Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel as to what exactly constitutes a psul in the get with all the implications because of malchus. This we're going to turn to Daf Pei Amid Beis.